Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Training Institute. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Hi, Transforming Trauma listeners. We're so excited to share the power of healing from complex trauma with all of you. It's inspiring to know that so many of you tune in to learn about how healing from complex trauma is possible. Are you interested in deepening your understanding of NARM? We're excited to present The Inner Circle, NARM's online learning community. Each month, members receive direct mentorship from NARM creator Dr. Lawrence Heller, NARM training director Brad Kammer, and other NARM faculty as they present NARM demonstration sessions and provide extensive debriefs on applying NARM with real clients. They also present live topic webinars that deconstruct the various elements of complex trauma. Members also get access to archived material and other learning resources, as well as access to a private Facebook group with other professionals learning NARM around the world. The Inner Circle is a hub for the international NARM community where people working with complex trauma come together to connect, network, and develop trauma-informed projects to help our world. You, our Transforming Trauma listeners, can receive a free 14-day trial with access to the 3-month archive by visiting www.narmtraining.com/free trial. And now for our interview. Amanda Huffman attended Baylor University, where she obtained a Master's of Divinity and a Master's in Social Work. She is also trained in Somatic Experiencing, Bodywork and Somatic Education, and the NeuroAffective Relational Model. Amanda has been in private practice since 2006 using a variety of modalities. In addition to private practice, she was the founder, co-owner, and clinical director of 2 different intensive outpatient clinics in Texas. Please enjoy my conversation with Amanda Huffman. Okay, welcome Amanda Huffman to Transforming Trauma. We're so happy to have you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about the work that you're doing, some of what you've learned in the work that you're doing, and the work that you're developing, and some exciting things coming up in the near future. So if it's okay with you, I'd love to start in a way that you're familiar with, because it's how we start a NARM session. And so please tell us, what would you like listeners to come away with from our conversation today?
Emily, I would love our listeners to get really excited about the microbiome and this new frontier of bacterial therapy. I think it's a term we're going to be hearing a lot more of. I hope they walk away with more knowledge and more excitement to live healthier. You see, our health and our mental health, because they're one and the same, it's directly impacted by the diversity of our microbes and the health of our gut lining. Then our gut lining is directly impacted by the food we choose to eat and how we choose to eat it. So the nutrient density of our food is then impacted by the health of our soil, which is directly impacted by our agricultural practices. So we're all intimately connected to one another and to our planet. And after talking today, I hope that others will feel as inspired as I have, that I've been on this journey of learning and healing.
And I love the piece that you highlighted about how connected we are to the earth.
Yeah.
And how traumatized our soil has been, and how that affects us and the food that we grow and eat.
As our soil becomes depleted, it's interesting. There's also this thing happening with our bodies. And I'll touch on that a little bit later, how these 2 things, we're losing nutrient density and microbial diversity. And it's really impacting our health and our well-being.
Oh, I'm excited to dive into that. So if you could tell listeners, more about the work that you're doing and how you entered the field that includes complex trauma.
I have to say it's been an interesting journey, and it's still evolving. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I started working in a psychiatric hospital down in Austin, Texas. I was trained in DBT, or Dialectical Behavioral Therapy, and I saw a lot of amazing people come to the hospital that needed help with significant trauma. And it didn't take me long to realize, I wanted to help people in a deeper way than just behavioral techniques or behavioral intervention. So I left the hospital, went into private practice, and started training in Somatic Experiencing. It happened to be starting in Austin, and I joined the cohort. And we're learning about polyvagal theory and the HPA axis, and really learning how to work with the nervous system, which was a whole new world to me. And during that time, I also became friends with a psychiatrist, and he was being trained in holistic and functional medicine. So we started having these wonderful conversations about helping people more naturally. Gut health became a big part of what we discussed. And I decided, okay, I'm going to go be a nutrition health coach so I can start to at least integrate discussions about nutrition and supplements into my practice. So these different avenues really started to develop in how I wanted to treat complex trauma. On one end, I'm completely immersed into learning as much as I can about healing trauma as a therapist, right? I'm an SEP. I'm becoming base trained. That's, bodywork and somatic education. And I'm really starting to develop through that training more skillfulness in just observing the body and skillfulness in my hands as I started to integrate more touch work. And then I started hearing about NARM. And of course, I read Larry's book and I thought, oh my gosh, this is it, right? Like, so many of my clients are coming to me for relational developmental trauma. So few land in your office and go, hey, I have this shock trauma event. Like, I need to work on a car wreck. I mean, maybe more now than 20 years ago when I started, but I knew NARM would really round out what I needed as a trauma therapist. And then there was this other avenue that was developing around nutrition and gut health. And at that time, my understanding was pretty modest, but it was starting to grow. And then there was this third avenue, and it was this little dream of moving back home to central Kentucky and buying a farm, which sounded crazy at the time. But my grandparents were farmers, and some of my best memories were running and playing on the land and feeding baby cows and, all that fun stuff. And so I thought, gosh, how do I bring these together? And I just had this little dream of opening a somatic trauma healing retreat center, something that would be small and intimate where people could come and play with a therapy cow and eat organic food right off the land. And so I decided to do it, and I pulled the trigger, and I moved home in December 2019, right before COVID, and started learning all about organic farming and regenerative agriculture and how the nutrient density of our food has dropped significantly in the last few decades. Some food has dropped as much as 40% in its nutrient loss. And so the pepper that you and I eat today, it is not the pepper that our grandparents ate when they were little. And so the crazy thing is that the same thing is happening to our physical bodies. Like, our food is losing the nutrient density, but our bodies are also losing microbial diversity at a pretty alarming rate. Even research within a 2-year time period is showing how much diversity that we're losing. So anyway, I'm also learning about soil health and how microbes in the dirt fight depression, and people who spend time in nature and touch the soil have greater diversity of gut bacteria. And, so these three avenues are really starting to show up. And this is how I've decided, like, I want to work with complex trauma. Like, they're converging for me, all under the idea of this retreat center where we can bring it all together. And then the next thing in my story, it wasn't so exciting. My dad was diagnosed with an incurable cancer. And I'm going to say yet incurable because I think we're very close with multiple myeloma. But he had several bone lesions on various bones in his bodies. And for those unfamiliar with multiple myeloma, it's a bone marrow cancer, and it can eat away at the bones much like termites. And so it can be very painful. And I love my dad. We've always had a really strong bond, so it lit a fire under me to learn as much as I could about plant-based medicine and natural healing. And there's this beautiful Ayurvedic proverb that says, when diet is wrong, medicine is of no use. And when diet is correct, medicine is of no need. Now, we're still a big believer in medicine, and we were going to go forward with immunotherapy like our specialist had recommended. But we also wanted to supplement his treatment in every way possible until we wouldn't need the medicine anymore. And so we started studying his cancer. And they do something called a FISH test. So we got to learn about the genetic abnormalities that he had. And we were learning about that. We were reading about his symptoms, and we were studying all the medicine that he would need to take. And For example, there's something called IL-17, interleukin-17, and it causes bone lesions. So we started to pick foods and target specific strains of probiotics that decrease or inhibit the IL-17. So he went through 4 months of treatment. He reached remission at month 3, actually. They went ahead and did the 4th month of treatment. And then in the 5th month, when they redid the CT scan of his body, all of his lesions were either completely healed or nearly completely healed. And his specialist said it was a phenomenal response to what he's going to credit being the medical treatment. And I think the medical treatment was really powerful, but I also think what we did to supplement it helped it to be such a phenomenal response.
Wow.
So it's really a remarkable story. And if we have time, I can talk more about that. But it was his diagnosis that really led me to consume all this info on the microbiome. And there's new stuff coming out like every day. So you have to stay on top of it. And, there's a famous quote by Hippocrates, and he said so long ago that all disease begins in the gut. And it's like 2,500 years later, and we're just now on the frontier of understanding that he was right and that we need to look
Right.
into this more.
Right.
And so there's the new research, and there's also some really good old research that if we were more familiar with it, it would be really, really helpful.
That's so exciting. It's so exciting how you're kind of pulling together all these different, it feels like I don't know. The intersection is really beautiful to me that you're able to do this with your background. You're a licensed clinical social worker, is that right?
Social worker. That's right.
And then you're kind of pulling in this piece of, even the idea of being out with a therapy cow. I'm gonna just be honest. I didn't know there was such a thing as a therapy cow. I've heard of therapy dogs and horses and other animals, but I've never thought of a therapy cow. And it makes so much sense to be back with nature and with a cow. How great.
And there's research that says children who grow up with animals, they have a greater diversity of gut bacteria. So anytime you're interacting with nature, you're actually helping your body. One of the studies that I wanted to mention that I thought would be really important for therapists to know who are listening today is an older study completed at Oxford. And it was a 3-year study, and it investigated the link between diet and behavior with a group of male inmates ages 16 to 21. And they found that there was a 40% reduction in behavioral offenses and a 37% reduction in violent offenses just by improving their nutrition.
Wow. That is mind-blowing.
Yeah. Mind-blowing. It's stuff that it's like, wow, why are we not learning this? Like, that would be so important to know, especially if you're working with people that are having difficulty with aggression. And some of the newer studies coming out are even more interesting. They're finding that specific strains of bacteria can produce mood-regulating neurotransmitters. So they can regulate our cortisol levels. They can actually stop the chronic cycling in a fight, flight, or freeze response. And what we know as therapists is being in kind of a chronic fight or flight state is going to increase neuroinflammation. And then you have depression and anxiety and other mental health diagnoses that we're trying to treat in our therapy office. So it's interesting to find out that some of this kind of really comes down to whether or not we have a specific strain of bacteria in our gut.
So sorry, I'm saying wow a lot. I'm just taking it in. But Amanda, if you could tell us, I'm so curious now how you're weaving in NARM to this work that you're doing. This all is fascinating to me. And I'm curious in this. So what are you calling it? It's a retreat center. Is that what you're building?
Yeah.
And if I can just let listeners know, or you can let listeners know what's happening today. There's some exciting things happening even today on your property.
Yeah, there's some really exciting things. I'll be heading out there right after this, but they are laying the foundation for the first cabin and actually the house that I'll be moving into. And they're also going to be finishing up this beautiful glass greenhouse that will allow us to grow food all year long. So I am just, really excited to be out there this weekend. And
that is exciting. So Sorry, I kind of threw like three questions at you at once. So could you tell us a little more about how you're weaving NARM into this work? I'm really interested in how you're doing that.
I think it might be helpful to talk about a specific client story. I had a female client come to me, and she had heard a little bit about what I was doing with nutrition and gut health. And she was like, I wanna improve my lifestyle. I want to start exercising more. I want to learn more about what I should be eating and what not to eat. And so we do a couple of sessions on this, but week to week, she's not implementing any of the changes. And it's like, huh, this is interesting. Like, I can give you the information, but it's really up to her whether she's going to take action on it. So that's actually where NARM come in. So we shifted gears for a few sessions, and we really looked at what is getting in the way of her living this life that she really wants to live. And she started doing this really good, deeper trauma work on early relationships with her mom. There was actually some pretty significant emotional and physical abuse. And it all related to this idea she can't succeed, right? She had to keep herself small. Success would be punished, it would be ridiculed, she would be made fun of. And so, as we started to work with NARM and help her with some of this older developmental trauma, then she was able to shift and start integrating some of the lifestyle choices that she wanted to make.
That is so powerful.
Yeah. So I see him as very complementary.
And not just complimentary, like I'm hearing it's a really integral part of what you're doing because like you said, you can give everyone, the client the information, they can know what it is that they want to do to achieve kind of these health transformations that they're looking for. But if there's something getting in the way, like that developmental trauma piece, getting in the way of them actually acting on what it is that they really want for themselves, that's huge. That's really huge.
Yeah. And we see it, it's so pervasive, right? It's like we all pretty much know that we need to eat less sugar and processed foods, and we need to eat more leafy greens. And yet, the majority of people aren't doing it. And so that's really where something like NARM can help people explore like what's happening, like what's holding them back.
I'm just integrating some personal information right now, taking notes, thinking about, okay, you're right. There are things that I know I want to be doing to support my physical health. Like I want to lead a healthy life and have the energy, to be with my family and loved ones. And yet there are still some pieces that I'm not doing. So right now in this moment, I'm just getting really curious about what's in my way. So that's really beautiful to hear how you're using NARM and supporting clients with that. So tell us more. What's the next step for you?
Well, I think one thing I would like the listeners to know there's so much information out there, right? Like this is so accessible if you spend a little time looking into it. And one of the microbiologists that I follow, his name is Kiran Krishnan, and he has some really fascinating research, and he's really great to listen to. Actually, he's very personable, and he really helped bridge the gap for me between why gut health and why trauma are so linked. And as trauma therapists, we know we experience a threat, sympathetic nervous system gets activated, blood starts to rush to our muscles, our brain, other areas of our body because we need to prepare to run or fight. And what he helped me understand is that there's also in this process, it's happening through a stimulation of our immune system. And that stimulation then increases inflammation. Simultaneously, the HPA axis is being activated and cortisol is being dumped into the gut. So the problem is that cortisol produces something called interleukin 6. So IL-6 can make its way out of your gut through leaky gut. So cortisol is producing IL-6, it's making your gut very leaky, and the IL-6 will leave, it'll travel to your brain, it will reactivate the HPA axis all over again, more cortisol gets dumped, inflammation goes up again, and now we're in this cycle of kind of chronic fight or flight. And it's interesting because it'll keep happening unless we have the right microbes to manage the cortisol. And this chronic kind of fight or flight state is typically the place where we as therapists will see clients come into our office. So in Karen Krishnan's research, they found that there's a specific strain of bifidolongum, which is bifidolongum 1714, and it actually has the ability to regulate cortisol and to stop it from making the gut leaky. So what we know as trauma therapists, again, is that our work is crucial in helping people regulate their nervous system. We need to help them connect with parasympathetic states of rest and digest. And if we aren't getting into a parasympathetic state, then the gut isn't moving, the peristalsis isn't happening, and we aren't absorbing the nutrients. So we can help them ease patterns in life that add to constant triggering of the SNS. What we might not know is that the addition of a quality probiotic and a specific strain of probiotic can really aid the work that we're doing. On a side note, just another interesting tidbit about it is that that specific strain also increases theta waves in the brain. And theta waves are what we experience when we're meditating. And then they also improve sleep because when it blocks cortisol, cortisol can then block the expression of something called BDNF. It stands for brain derived neurotrophic factor. And we don't want that blocked, right? We want to have BDNF because it helps the brain repair itself from inflammation while we're sleeping overnight. So, this one probiotic can help depression, anxiety, sleep, and the ability to manage stress, kind of expand our capacity when we bump up against stressors in life.
Gosh, I'm just kind of taking this in. So when you work with clients, how does this process look? So you're integrating the NARM to help them see what's getting in the way of them moving through this process. But what else are you doing? Because there's so many pieces I'm hearing you say.
So it's a lot of psychoed at that point, right? So when they're ready or when they're at the point where they're asking about it, or possibly where we're doing the work, but we're not seeing anything shifting, then I might start to get curious with them about their nutrition. And if they're interested, then we will start doing psychoed and we'll make some of the changes they feel ready to make. Typically, what I do with people, like the first step is like, let's try to clean up your diet a little bit. We don't have to be perfect, but let's try to decrease some sugar, alcohol, processed foods. If it's possible to eat organic, I highly encourage it. That way, we're not taking in toxins that our body has to work really hard to detox from. Those are some of the changes that I would help them make right away if they're up to it. And then we would start talking about improving your gut diversity. And I really look at that in three ways. There are prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics. And we're kind of familiar with pre and probiotics. Postbiotics seem like a new thing to most people. But prebiotics are the food that we're going to feed the bacteria. So you're going to want to increase fiber, both soluble and insoluble. Just do it slowly so it's not too much on your gut too quickly. We eat a diversity of food. So in my household, we shoot for 30 different plants per day. So that's veggies, fruits, and herbs. So it could be like an herb that you sprinkle on a salad too. So there's many ways to get this 30 a day. It doesn't have to sound as overwhelming as what I imagine people are experiencing.
Yeah, because I was just going to say that I'm already like thinking 30? Really? Let's see what's getting in the way of Emily getting 30. Can we just do a NARM session right now? Because I'm not getting 30. I can tell you that I'm not getting 30.
You'll get creative with it. Other important prebiotic foods would be flaxseed and asparagus. And they're important because they can bypass the small intestines and go right to your colon and feed the bacteria there. You can also just take a really good prebiotic supplement. So there are some really good ones on the market. Then you've got your probiotics, and they're the actual bacteria. So the important thing to know is that most probiotics on the market aren't doing anything. I will hear people say like, oh, mine's like 50 billion, whatever. That really doesn't mean that much, unfortunately. So you want quality over quantity. And you might start looking for really specific strains. So, if you do struggle with depression and anxiety, then you might want to target the Bifidolongum 1714 that we mentioned above. You also want to start looking at keystone species, and these are really some of the most important ones that our gut needs. These are strains like Akkermansia muciniphila, Clostridium butyricum. I feel like I'm going to get tongue twisted saying some of these. But if you haven't started hearing about Akkermansia yet, you will. It's getting ready, I think, to become more mainstream. It's a highly important strain for actually repairing the mucin layer of your gut. So for my dad, for example, was important because research showed that those with higher levels of Akkermansia in the gut responded more positively to immunotherapy, and they also stayed in remission much longer.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it worked synergistically with his immunotherapy. It's also more abundant in the guts of people that are naturally thin. So that's usually an interesting tidbit for people. You can increase Akkermansia without taking a probiotic by drinking pomegranate juice every day. But other good ways just to get a various assortment of good probiotics is through fermented foods. So we make our own kefir, we make our own kombucha. You can also eat sauerkraut, kimchi. All those type of foods are really, really good for your gut.
But can I just interject?
Yeah.
Don't put kimchi in your son's lunchbox because then his class and his teacher will hate him. I don't know who would have done that, but
You're not naming
but
any
then
names.
your son will come home and say, I liked kimchi, but I'm no longer allowed to take it to school. So, there's that. But anyway, other than that, I'm hearing you say there's many ways to get these things into our bodies.
Yeah, and you just want to look for quality, right?
Okay.
Usually how I do that is to make sure there's some research written about the probiotic brand or the jar of sauerkraut you might be picking up. The other thing I might mention here is that spore-based probiotics are actually very important. And this was something that was a little bit newer to me. But these bacteria are ones that have survived like hundreds of thousands of years. They were able to survive because they encapsulate themselves when conditions aren't ideal for them to grow. And they're also really smart. So they engage in something that they call quorum sensing. So essentially, when they hit our gut and they kind of come back to life, they look around and they're reading the gut. They know what microbes are there, what needs to be there, or what doesn't need to be there. And they will start feeding the good bacteria. And they go kind of like sit with the bad bacteria and start competing for food until they starve the bad bacteria out. Now, something like that's really important for people with C. diff. Like if you've heard of C. diff or if you know anything about it, it's a spore-based pathogen, and it actually kills a significant number of people a year because it's so hard to get rid of. So if you have C. diff, definitely look into spore-based probiotics. And the other neat thing about them is that they have the ability to shift our gut by 30% within just a few weeks.
And what is it shifting? When you say shift the gut by 30%, what is it shifting into?
It's feeding the good guys, right? It's helping to bring these good guys back to life. It's helping to increase their numbers, and it's helping to starve and kill off the pathogenic bacteria.
Okay, can I ask a question here?
Yes.
This is where my brain is going. Because I remember reading on your website, and I know I've heard at other places, that the gut brain actually can have more influence over maybe I'll let you because you're nodding your head. I can tell you know where I'm going with this. So tell us a little bit about that and how what you're doing or what you're helping clients to do, how does that influence their whole experience?
Yeah, so actually far more, I think like 95% of serotonin is made in the gut, not in our brain. Like we think if we're taking an antidepressant that serotonin is being created in our brain. It's really that we're affecting our gut health. So you're really kind of starting to shift the way you think about our overall health. Like as your gut improves, as the mucin layer improves, as you get healthier bacteria, as we starve out the poor bacteria, like that is going to literally impact everything. Because When it's not healthy, it's creating all this inflammation. Now, for you, it might go to your brain and be neuroinflammation, and you might struggle with depression, anxiety, ADD. For my dad, the overstimulation of the nervous system, what happened was with myeloma, there's this, we have immunoglobulins, it's our immune system, and they become monoclonal, meaning that it produces this one type over and over and over and over and over again. And they're not functional. So it's not like he's getting a supercharged immune system in this way. So your inflammation might hurt your brain. His inflammation hurt his immune system and started to produce multiple myeloma. And yet, when we look at the root of it, if you're going to start hearing this a lot with functional med, it's like root cause medicine. When we get back to the root, we're really going back to like, how do we balance the gut? How do we move out of a dysbiosis might be a term that you've heard, where there's like an imbalance in the good and the bad bacteria. And so like, how do we help bring that back into balance so that literally all the systems of your body are going to be improved by it?
I'm thinking how important it is that the underpinnings of what is keeping them from doing all of these things, because I imagine you have so many clients that come to you and they're probably so overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Because the information, it's like we are hearing all of these things and it can feel really overwhelming. And so how do you help clients really contain that and be in a place where they can make these shifts and changes? And I'm just appreciating the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you, first off. And it is hard, right? You have to meet everybody where they're at and what they're ready to do. And so for one client, it was just like, let's get you starting on green smoothies in the morning. And you don't even have to make them. You live in Austin, Texas. They're like great smoothie places on every corner. Just like go get your smoothie, because for her, life was so stressful. The ease of access to stuff like this was most important. And then at the same time, she went to see a practitioner that really helped her with her hormone levels. It's just kind of like, let's start where you're at. Let's start where you're capable of. And you don't have to know all this information. Like, I don't have to flood you with how all of this integrates. Like, I can just say, hey, would you be willing to try this probiotic for 30 days? And let's see what happens. And I have several clients right now that are testing it out to see if they find any benefit from it. I have one right now who really is struggling with sleep. And so we did get her on the bifidolongum strain and just checked in with her this morning. And she said, yeah, something has shifted pretty significantly with her sleep. And that's going to become foundational for all the other work that we'll do. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
It does. And I'm wondering if there's someone listening and they're thinking, okay, so what do I do now? Where do I go from here? I've heard this information. What's something that we can kind of explore for ourselves in this realm of the work that you're doing?
Maybe explore where you're ready to start. Like, what am I ready to do? Is it to like, am I ready to give up sugar? Am I ready to decrease alcohol intake or get rid of it altogether? Maybe I need to start with a good probiotic. There was, I can't remember who said it, but somewhere along the way, I heard this really great statement that you can't probiotic your way out of a fast food diet. Maybe we can start there though, right? If that's the only place they're willing to start, let's get the probiotic and let's see how that's helping you. If we can get a little bit of momentum in that area, then what can we add next? And simultaneously, as we're looking at all of that, then, we're integrating the NARM. We're looking at like, what are all these things that are holding you back? You're telling me you want to live healthier. You're telling me that this chronic state of activation is wearing you out and you feel exhausted all the time. Let's do the NARM work and let's look at like, what might you be willing to try for 30 days and let's see what happens.
Do you find with clients, like when you're doing that NARM side of it, are there any themes? Are there themes that you're seeing come up consistently with clients that are things that are getting in the way of them really embracing and moving toward greater health?
I think overall, it's like self-worth, self-love. I hear things like, I'm too busy. It's like, okay, let's take that barrier off and then let's really look at what's happening. For some of my clients with, like sexual abuse trauma, there could be this really strong disconnect from even wanting to improve the body. So that might be an area that we would have to look into first with NARM, and then the rest might be able to follow.
That's really helpful to kind of just be holding what are some potential blocks that we might just explore and just see, if it's a theme that's in their life that's playing out. So that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, I'm just appreciating again the work that you're doing. And I wonder, I don't know if we already talked about, what you've learned for yourself in this process, maybe around complex trauma or in this field that has really helped you that you would want others to know.
I think complex trauma is complex and our bodies are complex. And, we're kind of at this new time in our history where we're starting to integrate our fields. We're coming together more. It's not like therapy is just out here on its own and nutrition is out here on the own. Like I'm seeing more people work together. And that's what we need to do. We need to look at trauma through different lenses. Things that activate a trauma response might cause us to get stuck in a fight, flight, or freeze. Like, yeah, maybe we come into therapy to work on that. But we also need to look at nutrition. We need to look at the right supplements. We need to decrease cortisol because it's wreaking havoc on our body. We need to look at our habits, like binge watching shows late into the evening. And that's really disrupting our sleep. So I would say, in general, we have to stop compartmentalizing our body and our brain, that we're one system, and that we really need a whole body approach to our mental health.
That last piece, we need a whole body approach, which again, it sounds like that's really the work that you're doing. And with this, I'm excited to hear more in the future about your retreat center. And it sounds like you're including a lot. It's very integrative and very nature-based. So I'm going to be tracking your work. And I wonder if you could share with our listeners how they can find you, and if they like to be tracking the work that you're doing, how they can do that.
They can find me on Facebook and Instagram, and we're posting more pictures. People were wanting to see what was happening, so I had to do a little bit better of a job of posting pictures. My practice is amandajhuffman.com, and if you visit my website, you'll see the links where you can follow both my practice or the development of the farm. I'm hoping that it will be open in the spring. People might not want to visit yet because the garden will just be getting started, but in the summer and the fall, we should be in full swing and it'll be ready to go.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to have to take a trip out to Kentucky and visit your space. I'm so excited for that. And thank you so much for taking this time with us. And we'll be sure to put those links in the show notes for anyone who's listening that would like to just check in and see what you're up to and see those pictures on Instagram if they would like.
Absolutely. We would love that. And thank you so much, Emily. I'm really excited to share this information. There's just so much that can't be covered in one podcast. And hopefully it'll be a start and people will get curious.
Wonderful. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more about our guest and their work, check the show notes or visit us at narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. Are you interested in deepening your understanding of NARM? We're excited to present The Inner Circle, NARM's online learning community. Each month, members receive direct mentorship from NARM creator Dr. Lawrence Heller and NARM training director Brad Kammer, access to NARM demonstrations with extensive debriefs, and the opportunity to engage with the Hub for the International NARM community. Dive in with a free 14-day trial and access the 3-month archive by visiting www.narmtraining.com/free trial. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community, connection with you, and changing the world by transforming trauma.